over the next couple of weeks. So we're going to be finishing up a short little series that we began last week, 3-part message series, unpacking the Beatitudes. And it's called A Beautiful Life, is what our series is. And we know that probably if you've been around church any length of time, you've read the New Testament, you know the Beatitudes. They're those blessed are statements that Jesus tells us, he declares at the start of the Sermon on the Mount. Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are those who mourn, for those will be comforted. Those are the Beatitudes, okay? And someone somewhere along the line called the Beatitudes beautiful attitudes. And I think that's so true. That's exactly what the Beatitudes are. They're beautiful attitudes that give rise to a beautiful life. Because when Jesus says that we're blessed, he's not just referring to the fact that we have a blessing from God, although there are lots of rewards and blessings associated with each of those Beatitudes. But what he's saying when we're blessed is that we have an enviable state of living. Right? An enviable state of living. So when we're operating in these Beatitudes, when we have these beautiful attitudes, Jesus says that people should look at our lives and go, wow, I wish my life looked like that. That's what he's getting at. And actually, that's really what people spend most of their time on social media doing, isn't it? I don't know, you flick through social media like, oh, I wish my life looked like that. I wish I, had that top. I wish my hair looked like that. I wish I could fit into those jeans. I wish my house looked like that. I wish I had that car. I wish my kids /dog/cat were as well-behaved /cute /whatever as that person's kids, dogs, and cat. I mean, that's what people spend a lot of their time doing. It has a name. It's called Instagram envy. I don't know if you knew that. But it's, you're flicking through, I'm like, I want that. It's Instagram envy. And often we wish that our lives look like other people's in quite superficial ways. But actually, here in the Beatitudes, we have heaven's keys to living an enviable life in a life of real substance, in actually an eternal way. And so rather than having Instagram envy, how about we get into the Beatitudes instead and see what Jesus has to say about creating a life that makes other people look on and go, wow, I wish my life looked like that. So last week, we looked at the first 2 Beatitudes, and we looked at how we're blessed when we're humble. Okay, we're blessed when we're humble. How humbly trusting God, that's the people who are poor in spirit, is what that's it, or humble in spirit, depending on your translation. When we humbly trust God, that means that God's able to entrust us with the kingdom. That's what it comes down to. When we humbly trust God for everything, he's able to entrust us with his kingdom. And then the second Beatitude we looked at was that how we're blessed when we suffer. That when we suffer or mourn, we position for God to do incredible things on our behalf and to experience his comfort. That's what Jesus says. Those who mourn are going to be comforted. Those who suffer are going to be comforted. We get to experience the power of the Comforter in our lives, working in our lives. And it's actually when we suffer well that people look at our lives and go, wow, that person's suffering. Like, not good stuff is going on in their life right now, but look at them. Look at their joy. Look at how much they still trust God and believe in his goodness. Wow, I wish my life looked like that. Right? So that's what we talked about last week. This week, we're going to jump on and we're going to look at the next 3 Beatitudes. So if you have a Bible with you or your phone, go ahead and open it up to Matthew chapter 5 and verses 5 through 7. If you don't worry, I'm going to read it out. But if you want to follow along, feel free to do so. So Matthew 5 and verses 5 through 7. Verse 5, blessed are the meek, for they will inherit the earth. Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, for they will be filled. Blessed are the merciful, for they will be shown mercy. Let me read that again. It's only 3 verses. Blessed are the meek, for they will inherit the earth. Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, for they will be filled. And blessed are the merciful, for they will be shown mercy. So let's start with verse 5. Blessed are the meek, for they will inherit the earth. And for each of these Beatitudes, I'm kind of, some of the language of the Beatitudes is a little bit like, what's that all about? Like it's kind of, what are you really saying there, Jesus? And so for each of these Beatitudes, I've kind of given you guys a little bit of maybe a slightly more modern day, on to the point kind of translation. And so for verse 5, blessed are the meek, for they will inherit the earth. I want to tell you that you're blessed when you're gentle. Now, I don't know about you. When I think about people who are going to inherit the earth or own the earth, the meek are not the first kind of group of people who come to mind. That might well be because I'm not quite sure what a meek person really is. Right? What does that actually mean? It's not like a word we use in everyday language, is it? It's not like your boss does your job evaluation, and under your positive characteristics, he says they're meek. I mean, it doesn't happen, does it? But when I think of people who are going to inherit or own the earth, I think probably more of the time most 100 influential list. You know, I might think of people like Elon Musk or Oprah Winfrey or Mark Zuckerberg or Jeff Bezos or Donald Trump or Tom Brady or Harry and Meghan or, I don't know. But God doesn't say that it's the rich or the famous or the beautiful even that are going to inherit the earth. He says that it's the meek who are going to inherit the earth. So what does it really mean to be meek? Let's dive into that. The first thing we need to understand is that being meek is not being weak. Okay? Meekness is not weakness. Meekness can be equated with gentleness. And gentleness, as someone very clever once said, is strength under control. When you're being gentle, that's you're exerting strength, but in a controlled way. Okay? If you think about it, like we took our little dog Parker to the beach. He's a little Maltipoo. He's 9 months old now, so he's pretty small. And there's lots of big dogs there. And some of the big dogs, like, they come and they're bounding through, and they almost they send him flying. But some of the other big dogs come along and they sniff around and they're more gentle. That's what gentleness is, right? It's not that you don't have strength. You have strength, but it's under control. You exert it in a controlled way, so you don't cause a mess or cause pain or damage to anybody else or anything around you. You mean wagging your tail? Exactly, yeah, that's right. Now, the Greek word that's in this verse that's translated meek is pros. And in its secular sense, it referred to a wild horse that had been trained, particularly a wild horse that had been trained for battle. Okay? Especially, and so like the horse had been trained in such a way that it lost none of its strength. It lost none of its power. It wouldn't make sense to do that, to strip it of its strength and power, because it needed to go into battle. But rather, that strength and that power had been brought under control. It had been tamed and it had been bridled. And the reality is that God made us to be powerful people. He made us to be powerful people. We have the same power living in us, living inside of you, if you know Jesus, that raised him from the dead. If that's not powerful, I don't know what powerful is. That power is living inside of you. That's real power. And when we exercise meekness, we bring that power that is inside of us under control. We focus it, in a sense. Just think about light for a moment. Light is incredibly powerful. Just a small candle. If we were able to, it was dark, we shut up all the windows, and this room here was completely dark. Just a small candle would be able to light up the entire room. Right? But what happens when you take light and you bring it even more under control? If you take light, all the different light waves, and you bring them into alignment with each other, and you focus them on a particular place, what you get is a laser. And a laser can cut through metal. A candle can light up a room, but a laser can cut through metal. That's what happens when you bring light under control, when you harness all of its power and you bring it under control. Meekness doesn't reduce our power, it makes our power more usable to God, right? You know, we can be people who use our power to accumulate wealth or to enhance our status. But those who choose to use and wield their power gently can achieve the purposes of God here on the earth. And it says we live lives of meekness. God, in turn, gives us the place of authority and influence that we can't even claim for ourselves. That there's like the guys on the Times 100 most influential list, using their own power, they can get for themselves a certain amount of power and influence, right? But when we submit our power to God, when we allow Him to focus it, to use it for His goodness, actually we way surpass that level of power and that level of influence that's possible for those people on the Times 100 most influential lists. He gives us the authority and the power to reign with Christ as co-heirs with God, with Him. That's way beyond anything that Jeff Bezos is capable of doing in his own strength. When we bring our strength under control, when we operate in meekness, we operate in gentleness, God can use us. And He gives us those places that we, as meek and as gentle people, would never claim for ourselves. That's gentleness, okay? So let's move on and look at the next verse, verse 6. I want to tell you that in verse 6, you're blessed when you're hungry. Some of you guys who kind of 11:15, you're kind of thinking, man, it's coming up to lunchtime. I certainly don't feel blessed right now. I feel like I'd feel a lot better with a tri-tip sandwich in my belly or something like that. But that's what it says. You're blessed when you're hungry. Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, for they will be filled. And I think that hunger is a very subjective thing. Hunger to a child in a village in Africa who has not eaten in a week is not the same thing as hunger to one of my kids who complains that they're starving 20 minutes after they've just eaten something. Right? When they say, there's no food in the house, what that doesn't mean there's no food in the house. That means there's no food that you feel like eating right now in the house. Right? Hunger to us in the West and hunger to people elsewhere in the world are two very, very different things. And I wonder if, for those of us who have never really experienced true hunger, now fasting can kind of get us there. Fasting is really helpful in a sense because it gives us an idea of what it means to be hungry. But because we've never known what it really means to be desperately hungry, I wonder how hard it is for us to really comprehend spiritual hunger, what it really means to hunger and to thirst after God. Heidi Baker, who with her husband Roland leads the ministry, Iris Global, that we're actually part of every day. Our movement is part of Iris Global. And they work in Mozambique amongst some of the poorest people in this world. She says, sustained hunger in the West is a miracle. If we can go on hungering for God, not just for a weekend at a conference, but on throughout, weeks and months and even years, she says that's a miracle. And it's a miracle because in the West, that every need is taken care of, right? If being hungry to me means going to the refrigerator to get myself a snack and top off my stomach a little bit, then is that how I'm going to approach spiritual hunger? Does it kind of look like me just getting my little spiritual top off from reading the Bible for 5 or 10 minutes in the morning, and that's my hunger for that day satisfied, because that's really all I know hunger to be? Instead, what Jesus is talking about is a real depth of hunger, a real depth of thirst for more of God. That's the hunger and thirst, because that's what righteousness means in this verse. It's not so much about doing the right thing morally. It's about a desire for right relationship. It's about a desire for God. So if I was to take that food analogy a little bit further, what if the reason that we didn't hunger and thirst for God as much as he might like us to be is because we have too small of a vision of what the meal that he's offering looks like? When we lived, some years ago, we lived in Grover Beach in this little smaller apartment, and we had no real plans for 4th of July weekend. Happy 4th of July, everybody, by the way. And we had this kind of tiny little patio area at the back of our apartment in Grover Beach. And so we just invited a few friends over, and we had this tiny little grill that was, kind of super cheapo thing from Walmart, and we had some hot dogs, and that was kind of our 4th of July party. Maybe we had some sparklers in the backyard, and that was kind of it. The following year, however, we got invited to this block party in Arroyo Grande. Not that I'm saying Arroyo Grande is better than Grover Beach or anything like that, but we got invited to this block party in Arroyo Grande, and it wasn't just like a block; it was like a whole neighborhood. These people came out, and this guy called Dave, he's a master tri-tip cooker, griller, chef, whatever. He does it for a living now. And so it was outside the front of his house, and he would cook all this tri-tip, and everybody would bring food. So you imagine how many tables were needed to stack up all these plates from everybody in this entire neighborhood and kind of all their friends coming along. It was like a feast. It was just like food everywhere, all over the place. It was amazing. It was incredible. And I wonder whether, because our kind of idea of hunger and thirst and our vision of what this food might be, is that if we're content with our kind of hot dog devotional life, when God's saying, hey, I've got this entire feast on offer that you're missing out on. Well, you're like, no, God, I'm over here. I'm good with my hot dog. I'm full now. And he's over there with this giant, humongous 4th of July feast with tri-tip, not hot dogs. And we're just missing out because we don't understand what's on offer. We've been content with our spiritual fast food meal of a daily Bible reading and a request list that we call prayer. And we've lost sight of the fact that the Father's created, cooked, prepared this incredible great feast for us. This 5-course feast that lasts for hours and hours and hours and hours. And every time we come to his table, there are new things on offer to try. Because we can never fully understand who he is. He keeps showing us new things, new aspects of himself. Like a diamond, a beautiful, multifaceted diamond. And everywhere you just hold it a slightly different direction, it catches the light in a different way. That's who he's like. That's what's on offer from our God. If we could grasp the fact that that's the kind of meal he wants us to experience day in, day out, wouldn't that cause us to be a little bit more hungry? Wouldn't that cause us to go, yeah, I'm kind of sick and tired of hot dogs. I want the feast. I'm hungry for the feast, God. King David was a man who'd experienced the intimacy of relationship that God had to offer. Like, he got it. He'd experienced it. And he wrote in Psalm 27, "One thing I ask of the Lord, the thing I seek most is to live in the house of the Lord all the days of my life, delighting in the Lord's perfections and meditating in his temple." And in verse 8, "My heart has heard you say, 'Come and talk with me.' And my heart responds, 'Lord, I'm coming.'" So much hunger on display. David got it. He'd tasted the feast, like he'd seen the feast, and he was hungry for it every single day. And the amazing thing about this beatitude is that what God is looking for is a desire. It's simply a desire. Just like David, whose desire was an intimate relationship with God. One thing I ask, thing I seek most. When we desire right relationship with God, when we hunger and thirst for it, Jesus says, you're going to be satisfied. All it takes is a desire. Sometimes all it takes is a desire to have a desire. Because sometimes that's all we can muster up. So God, I'm not hungry for you right now. God, I don't even desire to be hungry for you now. But God, I have a desire to be hungry for you. Sometimes that's the only place we can get to. But that's all it takes. All it takes is a desire, because God is so good. And as we just turn our hearts towards him just a little bit, he comes running. It's not like, he's standing over there. He's like, come on, keep going. You need to put the effort in. If you want this thing, you're going to have to walk all the way across, You're going to have to swim all the way across the swimming pool to me, like we do as kids, when we're adults with our kids. Come on, you can do it. Keep going, keep going. That's not what God does. As soon as we change our hearts, as soon as there's a little glimmer of a difference in desire in our hearts, he comes running. That's the Father that he is. Just look at the story of the prodigal son, which really should be called the story of the loving Father, because that's actually what it's about. It's not really about the son. It's all about the Father. So we can build an appetite for this feast of intimacy that God has for us. And he's going to satisfy. It's not like Oliver Twist. Please, sir, I want some more. That's and being turned away empty-handed. We can come with confidence going, God, I want to experience this feast you have for me. And he's like, come on in. Here it is. It's all laid out for you. We just move towards that place of hunger, and he will satisfy that hunger for us. Beatitude number 5, our last one for today, verse 7. Jesus tells us that you're blessed when you're merciful. You're blessed when you're merciful. Blessed are the merciful, for they will be shown mercy. So mercy has a reciprocal nature. Similar to elsewhere it says in the Bible, talking about forgiveness. If you show someone else mercy, you'll be shown mercy yourself. And a good starting definition of mercy is that we show someone mercy when we don't give them the punishment that they deserve. Okay? That's what God does for us. He shows us mercy. Someone did something to you that caused you pain. They deserve a slap in the face, and you don't give it to them. You're displaying mercy and some self-control and meekness in that moment right now. The perfect illustration, really, to mercy is a story that Jesus told a little bit later on in Matthew 18 about a servant who owed his master 10,000 bags of gold. That's quite a lot, really, isn't it? If you think about that, gold, 10,000 bags of gold. And the servant couldn't repay the master. And so the servant comes back to his master. He falls on his knees and he begs him, Master, please give me more time. Please be patient with me. And the master decides to have mercy. He doesn't even just give the servant more time. He actually cancels the debt. 10,000 bags of gold canceled right there. Like, I'd feel pretty good about that if I was that servant. Going in, if you imagine you're defaulting on your mortgage, and you have to go to the bank and you say, please, can you let me skip a couple of payments? Please, can we rearrange some things here? And the bank manager says, you know what? Let's just cancel the mortgage. That's what the master did right there for his servant. But then the servant leaves, and he goes out, and he comes across another servant who actually owes him money. He owes him 100 silver coins. Not really 10,000 bags of gold, is it? And what does the first servant do? He grabs the second servant and he starts choking him, saying, you need to give me the money that you owe me. This servant who'd just been forgiven and been shown mercy to the tune of 10,000 bags of gold is choking the servant who owes him 100 silver coins. And the second servant, again, begs him for mercy. But the first servant says, nope, you're not getting any mercy out of me. You're going to go to jail until you can repay the debt. The master, of course, hears about this, and this is what we read in Matthew 18, verse 32. The master called the servant in. He said, you wicked servant, I canceled all that debt of yours because you begged me to. Shouldn't you have had mercy on your fellow servant just as I had on you? In anger, his master handed him over to the jailers to be tortured until he could pay back all that he owed. This is how my heavenly Father, Jesus says, will treat each of you unless you forgive your brother or sister from the heart. So there's in God's kingdom, in God's eyes, in God's priority of things, there's definitely a reciprocal nature to mercy. If you don't feel like we're experiencing a ton of mercy in our lives right now, maybe we need to take a look and see how much mercy we have on other people. But also in Matthew, we find another way of understanding mercy, or another layer to this understanding of mercy. In Matthew 15, there's a Canaanite woman, and she cries out to Jesus, "Lord, Son of David, have mercy on me. My daughter is demon-possessed and suffering terribly." In Matthew 17, a man comes to Jesus and says, "Lord, have mercy on my son. He has seizures and is suffering greatly. He often falls into the fire or into the water." And then in Matthew 20, two blind men are sitting by the side of the road when they heard that Jesus is passing by. And so they begin to cry out, "Lord, Son of David, have mercy on us." So in each of these cases, because of a Jewish understanding of how sin worked, people probably believed that they were being punished by God for some sin or another, and so they needed mercy from that punishment. Okay? Jesus kind of challenges that thought and idea elsewhere in the Gospels. But what's really important to notice is that in each of these cases, mercy involved doing something. Mercy involved a practical action. "Son of David, do something for me," was what they were crying out. Okay? It wasn't any good for Jesus to walk on by and saying, "Okay, yeah, have some mercy." No, he actually had to do something. They needed something from him. Being merciful is not just about having a forgiving attitude towards someone, but mercy is a practical action. The English word mercy comes from Latin, and where one of the meanings of the Latin word is favor. When we show mercy to someone by helping them with a practical need, we're demonstrating to them God's favor. In the book of Micah, God calls us to do justly and to love mercy. Right? It's a well-known verse. Mercy and justice, they go hand in hand. They go together. And an unjust situation, many of you have heard me say this before, but an unjust situation is any situation that exists on earth that would not exist if God's kingdom was perfectly manifest here and now. God's kingdom is a kingdom of justice. There is no injustice in heaven. And so any situation, anything that's going on earth right now that would not be happening in heaven, would not be happening if God's kingdom was perfectly expressed, is unjust. Abuse, oppression, discrimination, homelessness, sickness, human trafficking, poverty, they're all just a few examples of injustice. And when we do what we can do to help people who are experiencing those issues of injustice, we're extending mercy. It's not just about, hey, someone did something to me and they really deserve punishment for that, but I'm going to be merciful and not give them the punishment. It's actually proactive. When we go out and we make a difference in this world, when we address issues of injustice, we're actually extending mercy. We're being merciful people. And so therefore, God says you're going to experience mercy in your life as well. When we think about those kind of areas, often we get paralyzed into inaction. I know that there are some of us who do all sorts of different things. Stan goes down to Skid Row regularly and is trying to build a base in Skid Row. I know that Mike ministers to the homeless on a couple of times a week up in North County. It's not that there's nothing going on right here, and it's part of our heart to do more and more here in the city of SLO. But what happens is that we look at the world, we see it's in such a mess, and we go, I can't do everything. So what do? We do nothing. But just because we can't do everything doesn't mean we shouldn't do something. Every little thing we do impacts somebody's life. Someone who is a precious child of God. When we combat injustice, we're showing the mercy of God to people's lives. God's heart of mercy is turned towards those people who are experiencing injustice. And if we're going to be his sons and daughters, then our hearts should be turned in that same direction. Amen? These Beatitudes are God's way of living. They're not the world's way of living. The world says that you're doing good when you take what you want, right? But God says you're blessed when you're gentle. The world says you're doing good when you're satisfied. But God says you're blessed when you're hungry for more of him. And the world says that you're doing good when you cancel those who disagree with you, when you tell them how wrong they are. But God says that you're blessed when you're merciful. I think social media would look a whole lot different if we just had a little bit of mercy when we started posting and commenting on stuff that other people have written or said that we don't agree with.